I mentioned, the chief tactic of the left is that you're not a good person, right? It's unearned moral superiority. Leftists don't do anything for the world, okay? Leftism doesn't do anything for the world. Leftism is a philosophy of stealing and taking and voting for people to put a gun to somebody else's head to take crap from you for their own personal betterment, right? That's what leftism is. Socialism is the most selfish philosophy in human history. It's the basic notion that I'm breathing and therefore you owe me crap, okay?
So I'm not sure if he's trying to say that leftists are all socialist, or especially in America that liberals are socialist. Now, we definitely are social democrats, and which means that we believe in capitalism with certain socialized programs like universal health care, Medicaid, Medicare, etc., welfare. But when you talk about bringing a gun to your head, that sounds like you could be construed against taxation. Now, whatever we advocate for, anybody can use it. Universal health care, anybody can use it. Everyone's covered. Social safety net, if you get to the point of poverty, you are able to use it. So anybody is able to use it, etc., whether it be the fire departments, etc., So I don't know what you mean by personal embetterment there. In certain cases, that's true, but surely people who don't qualify for certain things, like the social safety net, they are in favor of them. And so this is just an embarrassing argument. And it's repackaged shit that's just these truisms or euphemisms used by this guy, Ben Shapiro, which are supposed to be these super innovative things when it's the same shit that has been said over and over and over again. It sounds like an angry 12-year-old boy reading Ayn Rand screaming at the world about leftism.
Their premise, you have to frame your opponent. This is because, unfortunately, people on the right, we like to argue in terms of policies and in terms of information. Folks on the left like to argue in terms of character. Right? Folks on the left love this. This is why Hillary Clinton's entire argument against people on the right is that they're terrible human beings who want to hurt folks. Right? This is Hillary's argument. This is Bernie Sanders' argument. Right? Bernie Sanders has no intelligible argument. I'm not even sure he speaks an intelligible language. But what he does say is that everybody who opposes him is a bad person who doesn't care about the poor enough, while playing the air bongos.
Bernie Sanders is one of the most, if not the most, policy-oriented politician out there. He rarely talks about identity or anything like that. And what he's trying to say is that he calls people bad people who don't care about the poor instead of talking about policies, but that's not true. What he does is he states the policy, gives the facts, and then says, objectively, you don't give a shit about the poor, whether it be trying to repeal Obamacare, which would throw over 20 million Americans off of their health insurance, leading to more people being broke or going bankrupt or dying because they don't have access to basic health care. Again, 40,000 Americans die per year because of it. So what you're talking about is clearly policy-oriented Bernie Sanders, but you're lying and you're strawmanning him because you have no real argument against what he says. And so you just go in and just claim that, all he does is claim that someone's a bad person. No, he states the facts, and then what he says is, based on my conclusion, you are in opposition to Obamacare, which helps poor people. So yes, you don't want to help poor people, and that's the truth. Facts don't care about your feelings.
So if you were debating Bernie Sanders, for example, the first thing that you would say to Bernie Sanders is, Bernie, you like to sit on your high horse and talk about how much people ought to give, what is their fair share. Why is it that you honeymooned in the USSR while it was literally shipping people off to gulags and then killing them? Why is it that you were so okay with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and you actually made Burlington, Vermont, a sister city to the capital of Nicaragua, in the middle of a time when leftist tyrants were murdering people in the streets? Why is that okay with you? What's wrong with you as a human being?
This is what's so ridiculous about people like Ben Shapiro. This guy's entire motto is facts don't care about your feelings, and an attempt to lose the moral high ground of what he strawmans the left as of just character attacks when he just strawmanned Bernie Sanders. He's not only going to talk about character attacks, but he's going to outright lie. So what he just claimed is that Bernie Sanders honeymooned in the USSR. That's actually false. So Burlington was actually a sister city of Yaroslavl because Bernie was trying to have diplomatic relations to ease tensions between the USSR and the US, and that was the time where the USSR was getting dismantled. Essentially, it was pretty much dying out at that point, and he was trying to get tensions eased between the USSR and the US. it wasn't a honeymoon that he went on. When he went there, it was mainly for diplomacy. It was all about, meeting with leaders and talking for specific governmental purposes. So PolitiFact says, but it says Sanders and his wife did travel to Yaroslavl, a city in the Soviet Union, after their wedding in 1988. In the sense that the trip came after the couple were married, the trip was a honeymoon. The two have also referred to the trip that way, albeit sarcastically at times. But it was an unusual honeymoon to say the least. The trip's primary purpose was diplomacy, not leisure, and included about 10 extra guests. So basically, they were testing this claim, and PolitiFact can be very neoliberal at times, and so they're being very careful in what they say here. But basically, when Bernie and Jane would say it, they would say it sarcastically because it wasn't actually a honeymoon. It wasn't a honeymoon by any means. It was a trip to go for diplomacy, and it was just a bunch of diplomatic things that they did. And so that's just ridiculous. And when it comes to the Nicaragua thing, Bernie Sanders was, the whole purpose of being a sister city was to help the citizens of Nicaragua. So the idea that he's doing something bad there is massively stupid.
Put him on the defense. You have to frame him as a person, right? Because now he knows he's on notice. It's mutually assured destruction. If he's going to bring a character attack, you're going to bring a character attack, and yours is based on fact while his isn't. So you have to frame your opponent. Rule number 3, you have to frame the debate. So what the left likes to do is argue the debate in their terms. And they have all sorts of tricks for this. So, for example, on same-sex marriage, the way they frame the debate is always, why do you want to stop two people who love each other from marrying each other? This is always the way that they discuss this issue, right? That's always the question. And the answer to that isn't, well, I do want to stop those people from marrying each other. The answer is, why do you think a child does not deserve a mother and a father? Or you have to change the terms of the debate, because they're actually two separate questions. And the second one is significantly more important, because personally, I don't care about what two people want to do with their lives. That's their problem. I may think it's sinful, but welcome to America, where I can think something's a sin and you don't have to agree. The problem that I have is when you're suggesting that government ought to value certain relationships above others when those relationships are specifically about the bearing and rearing of children. Right? So you have to reframe the debate.
This is more bullshit coming from Ben Shapiro. What a child deserves is two nurturing parents. That's what they deserve. And what he talks about later on is about saying that the relationship of marriage is specifically for bearing and rearing of a child. That's complete bullshit, because marriage does not have to have kids. People can have a marriage without having kids. They could be, old and infertile and a bunch of other stuff that could happen. A bunch of other stuff, it's just complete bullshit. And then he tacks on at the end that, that they should value, that the government should value one relationship over another. It's complete bullshit. Nobody on the left is arguing for that. What they're arguing for is equality, and we just got that in 2013 where, gay people can get married just like straight people can. So nobody's asking for a higher value. They're just asking for an equal value.
Right? What the left actually believes deep down is so reprehensible and so repugnant and so gross.
Oh man, social democracies are so morally reprehensible and so morally repugnant. Oh man, those social safety nets and universal health care, morally reprehensible.
They will never say it out loud. Instead, they cover it in a sort of patter that's completely inconsistent. So, to give a gun example, one of the things you'll hear from the left about guns is that assault weapons bans are the greatest idea in the world, which makes no sense, right? The vast majority of murders that are committed with guns are committed with handguns. Why don't they want to ban handguns? The answer is, well, this is true also. There's no such thing as assault weapon, but the internal inconsistency in their argument, is that they say assault weapons are bad because they kill lots of people. The truth is that handguns are used in far more murders than so-called assault weapons. So why don't they want to ban handguns?
So this is an interesting point, a stupid point, by the way, that I've seen Ben Shapiro fans use themselves. So this is a dumb argument for this reason. So first of all, people on the left don't say it's the greatest idea ever. Of course, he's trying to strawman some more. But when someone like myself argues for an assault rifle ban, it's because a mass shooting is different from a single or double homicide. Those are not the same thing. So what they're trying to do is lump in all gun deaths, which is bullshit, because a mass shooting in a school is not the same thing as your, single homicide in a gas station or wherever it happens. Those are two fundamentally different things because the core of the problem is different. The core of what happens and what occurs is far different. And so the way that you prevent mass shootings is different than how you prevent single and double homicides. So by banning assault weapons, what you're going to do is you're going to basically effectively be able to end or lesser as much as possible the frequency of the most severe shootings. So the solution to mass shootings was not going to be the same as the handguns. Now, there are going to be things like universal background checks and other regulations that are, bringing down the gun deaths for the handguns. But, with the Second Amendment in place, you can't ban handguns, and there's always going to be that cost when it comes to freedom. However, with the well-regulated militia clause within the Second Amendment, it's just like Ben Shapiro draws his lines. You can draw a reasonable line of, okay, assault rifles, we're not in Iraq, we have general population, we have a lot of people, it's a danger to society, and therefore that should be banned. That assault rifle should be banned because you don't need an assault rifle. Now, some people need, handguns for self-defense, and then we can get into the topic of, overthrowing tyranny and stuff like that in another subject. But the point here being that with the well-regulated militia clause, it allows us to make sensible regulations like banning assault rifles in a country with 350 million people because it is a danger to society, and it allows for things like mass shootings to happen, whether it be in Las Vegas or, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High and a bunch of other schools that it's been going at. And there would be other regulations that would be put in place that would lower handgun deaths, but the way that you tackle the issue of handgun deaths and mass shootings is far different from each other. And so no matter what you do, the Second Amendment is in place, and as long as that's in place, you can't ban handguns, and I don't think we should. I think that that's actually a bad idea, because I think that there are people in rural areas in which police forces are pretty stale and slow, and they really need to protect themselves, and I think that, those people should be able to have a handgun. We just need universal background checks and important regulations like banning bump stocks, etc., etc.
So you can always spot that the left is filled with these sorts of inconsistencies, right? Even on global warming, they say, well, global warming, it's going to heat up the world and we're all going to die and the polar bears are going to drown. They won't be able to drink Coca-Cola anymore. It's going to be all sad. And don't you want to stop that? And then you say to them, well, but by your own scientific studies, isn't it true that you don't know what level of carbon emissions lead to a certain level of temperature increase? So given that, according to your own studies, we could dramatically decrease the amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere, and we'll still increase the temperature. The amount of the temperature increase will still happen according to your own models because that carbon's already in the atmosphere. There's no way to stop that. And they have no answer for that because it's internally inconsistent, because the real agenda for global warming is a giant economic leveling and taking down of Western economies in favor of less developed economies, because essentially the people pushing this are economic Marxists.
So this is terrible, because no longer are you really looking at the solutions, but you're really now looking at the science of climate change and, the correlation, causation type of stuff when it comes to carbon emissions, CO2 emissions, and temperature raises. But, he's trying to comment on the science here, which is just ridiculous, and not even myself can really comment on science like that. But the overall point here being is that claiming that we could lower our CO2 emissions but the temperature still go up, even if that were true, there are ways to be able to lower the the actual carbon with different things that we can do. But even if that were true, the temperature would go up at a slower pace, which would then further preserve our environment. And what he goes on at the end about, economic Marxists, which is just a disgusting conspiracy theory. And I don't know how people take him seriously when he says stuff like that, because you're no longer an intellectual person when you're just going to make some conspiracy about an issue and pretend like you know anything about the science, and then, when you get checked on, you say, oh, no, I'm not talking about the science, I'm talking about the solution. No, you're talking about the science there, because you're talking about carbon emissions and what, the scientific response would be. And, it's just ridiculous.
When you're in debate with folks on the left, they always have a red herring. It's amazing. I've been giving this particular speech I've been giving for probably 5 years at YAF, and they're still using the same red herring. They still use it, right? It's the only one that they have, right? So you're talking about Barack Obama's foreign policy is terrible. It's just terrible. The world's on fire. He's been feckless. He's incentivized all of America's enemies to become more powerful and more anti-American. People are dying all over the world because of President Obama's foreign policies. And the first thing they do is they scream in agony, and their head swivels full 360 degrees, and they vomit in all directions, and then they shout, Bush, right? Like Linda Blair from The Exorcist. which is a reference that your parents will get, but you may not. So like Linda Blair from the Extra. So in any case, the proper answer is don't get distracted by George W. Bush. Okay, first of all, he's not that distracting. Second of all, George W. Bush is not relevant to this conversation. Okay, he's not. What does it matter what George W. Bush did in 2003 in Iraq? What matters is what you're doing right now. Right? We're not talking about that. If you want to debate Iraq, we can also debate whether it would have been better if Woodrow Wilson had stuck with his Russian intervention in 1919 instead of allowing the Russian Reds to beat the Russian Whites. I mean, if we're going to do a historical debate, let's go all the way back to the beginning. Let's do this thing, right? Let's talk about John C. Calhoun, right? Let's talk about Millard Fillmore. Let's go all the way back, right? Let's talk about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Hell, let's go back to Adam and Eve. I mean, that was a big debate, wasn't it? Let's take this sucker all the way back to the top.
So this is probably one of the biggest embarrassing points of this entire video. Basically, what he starts out doing is just meaningless platitudes, right? He doesn't give any specific examples. He doesn't give any specific cases and numbers or anything like that. He just gives you platitudes of more people being anti-American, more people can die. You're not being detailed at all whatsoever. You're not even giving any examples. You're just giving a platitude. But what's most embarrassing is what he goes on to say after that, where he's trying to talk about how, oh, they say Bush and it's not relevant. The idea that you cannot extrapolate things from history and look at what happened in history, especially with George W. Bush, because when you have a president that goes into the Iraq War and you're talking about, okay, what should we do now with Iraq? If you honestly think that it's not even worth thinking or discussing how we got in there and why we got in there, then you are absolutely insane or you're just moronic, because that's important contextually. Even if you're on the side of staying in and continuing your intervention, that doesn't mean that it's irrelevant of how we got in there in the first place, especially when that's modern. Because in terms of history, historically, that's nothing. That's microscopic, because you're talking about during Obama administration, between Obama and Bush, you're looking at like it's a 7-year difference essentially, because you have Obama taking place in 2008 and, the Iraq War stuff happening in 2003. So you're looking at like a 5-year difference. And so what you're talking about is very relevant stuff, especially when you look at the historical scope and comparing, the Russian Revolution and stuff like that, which is something you could talk about if you want to, but it has nothing to do with policy position right now. But this is specific, and this is just something that's just unbelievably ridiculous, and it's just flat out wrong and stupid, and it's moronic.